Welcome to Intentional Divorce Insights. I'm Leah Hadley, certified divorce financial analyst, accredited financial counselor, and the founder of Intentional Divorce Solutions. I'll be your guide through the complexities of divorce, finance, and emotional wellness. Join me as we uncover practical tips and empowering insights to help you navigate your divorce with clarity and intention. Hi there, and welcome back to Intentional Divorce Insights. It is my pleasure to welcome back Liesel Darby to the show. As you all know, Liesel is a divorce coach and mediator with our practice here at Intentional Divorce Solutions, and it is always a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk with her. Welcome, Liesel. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. You know I love doing these.
So we have an important topic to talk about today, Liesel, and that is 5 of the biggest mistakes people make during divorce, and more importantly, how to avoid them. So let's where do we want to start?
Well, let's just say something general. Like, divorce is just such a stressful time in people's lives. It's one of the worst things you're going to go through besides, a death of a loved one. And it's just one of these times when you can be completely overwhelmed and you just don't know what you're supposed to do or how you're supposed to act. And so I just wanted to talk about some of the things, just some pitfalls. And like you said, the more important part is how do you avoid those so
That's
you don't
right.
have to dig yourself out of a hole. So
What is the first one?
yeah, let's just dive right in here. So the first one, and I see this all the time, is letting emotions drive your major decisions. Right. So in divorce, you are making big decisions during this time. What are you going to do about property? What are you going to do about finances? What are you going to do about kids? And the decisions that you're making have long-term impacts, right? And if you are making those decisions out of what I call big emotions like rage, fear, anxiety, if you're hurt or if you want revenge, that's a real one too. You are not going to be making the best decisions for yourself. You're making them from, I call it Amy, your amygdala. That's where our emotions are, and I call it hijacking your amygdala. And when that happens, you are in no space to be making any kind of a big decision for yourself. So what what you have to do is get into a place where you're calm, where can be a rational person again in your prefrontal cortex, and that sometimes that takes a little bit of time to get there. But you don't want to be making decisions, like I said, when you're in these big emotions, and it's really not in your best interest. It's coming from a different place. So, like a really common example is if there's been infidelity, which is a big part of why a lot of couples break up. You might very well have feelings of rage and revenge. And I will speak from personal experience here. That's exactly how I felt. I don't know what's going on with my throat here. But I had those feelings. In fact, I was so angry. I was having dreams where I had this woman pinned down on a concrete floor and I was bashing her head
Oh my
against the floor.
gosh.
I had that a couple times. And I'm not a violent person, but
Right.
it was coming out in some kind of way.
Sure.
And so how that was manifesting for me when we were starting our mediation process was I didn't want to cooperate because it's like, well, why should I make this go smooth for him? Because he's going to run away with this other woman. And so I was kind of digging my heels in a little bit at first until I realized I was only hurting myself. Because, for one thing, I didn't want him back at that point. But I had to get to a point where I was going to be okay, like, okay, we just need to let this go because I have my own life that I need to focus on. But also, just from a more practical point of view, um, you can burn through a lot of money if you drag out a divorce.
Absolutely.
You can burn through a lot of money. And when I realized that, well, that was less money for us to divide, that kind of was a reality check for me. And not just that. So that was what helped me put the brakes on and get a different mindset about that. But it really was more of a shift that no, I got to don't focus on him. Don't focus on what he's doing. He's doing what he's going to do. I still have a life here that I have to scrape up the shattered pieces off the floor here and try to reassemble into something that is going to be good for me at that time. So the other thing a lot of people go through is fear of the unknown, right? So divorce is blowing up your world, some more profoundly than others. But it does mean change. No matter how you slice it, it does mean a change in pretty much everybody's lives, yours, your husband's, your kids. And so I always say that when I'm working with my divorce coaching clients is fear is just unanswered questions. So if you are going through this period, maybe it's just at the very beginning, and let's say you've been a stay-at-home mom for a lot of years, taking care of the kids, and suddenly you're faced like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be on my own. I haven't worked in, 10 years. I don't know how spousal support works. I don't know what kind of money situation I'm going to be in. It can be paralyzing. So I always tell people, get your answer, whatever it is your fears around, go and find some answers around that so that you at least have some building blocks to start with that can really help to get you out of that fear space. And actually, the minute you start doing something, like taking any kind of action towards that, you will feel better. It's just how things.
A business coach once taught me, and I think that this is very helpful and can apply to a lot of different situations. But when I was newer in business, I really struggled with taking risk, right? Like I was just really afraid to take risk, and learning to really trust my ability to deal with whatever the results are was really important as my growth as a business owner. So sometimes even those fears that we have aren't necessarily questions that can be answered, but fears that just need to be identified, questions that need to be asked, maybe not answered, right? But then acknowledging, okay, well, what if this does happen? Can I handle it? And the case is going to be, yeah, you can, or you need this support, or whatever the case may be, right? But learning for yourself that you're going to be able to navigate these things can
Right.
help you get out of that paralysis.
Exactly. It's just exactly what you said is just knowing that you don't have to have the end answer
Right,
because that might be way down the road. Who even knows? De-
right.
Depends on when you cut the script, right? What's the what's the final thing there? But just knowing that you have some resources to help you with to get this through, or even just maybe the answer is for yourself, just being able to say, I will be able to handle whatever is directly in front of me.
Hmm.
Because we can all do that. Whatever is directly in front of us, we will handle that in some way. Some
That's right.
ways are better than others, but at least it's in front of you and you can do something about it. When it's out too far out into the future, that's where the anxiety comes in, because you can't do anything about it. It's not here yet. So while there's things that you can plan for, and we'll talk about that, especially with your area, um, it's not something that's right here that you can kind of wrestle to the ground and choke out an answer, even though you might really want that at that time. But again, it's knowing that you have the reserves and the resources to be able to handle whatever it is that's being thrown at you, and you will find resources to help you do it in the best way possible.
Absolutely. So emotions driving the process can be a huge mistake for a variety of reasons. What are some of the other mistakes that people make?
Okay, so the second thing let's talk about is thinking that your lawyer is going to handle everything for you. Okay, and whether this is just wishful thinking, I mean, so again, maybe, anytime you're talking about divorce, one person's usually been thinking about it for a while. The other person might have no idea, or maybe they know things haven't been great, but they didn't think it was to this point, or maybe you've thrown the D word around so often that, you just think it's just something we talk about. We're never going to pull the trigger on it. And when somebody does, it can be a huge shock. So, and I totally understand that at that point, you might not even have the wherewithal to think you're going to be able to handle everything that divorce entails. And you might want to really believe that, oh, my lawyer's got this. They are going to just take care of everything. They're going to make sure I get everything financially that I'm entitled to. I'm not even going to have to talk to my ex about anything ever again. The lawyers are going to handle this. And that's such a sweet daydream. I hate to wake you up into the nightmare that your life might be for a little bit. That's really harsh to say. I take that back. Um, but
No,
anyway,
but if we look at it from the opposite side, right? You can
yeah,
allow it to be an empowering experience because really
yes.
letting your attorney handle everything can be disempowering, right? But acknowledging the fact that you do play a role and that you play a really important role in communicating your needs can be very empowering.
It's very empowering. And that's where I always try to get my clients to that place where you make the decisions,
Right.
right? It might be a lot of information that you're going to have to kind of absorb and sit with and figure out, but they're going to be your decisions for what's in your best interest and the best interest of your kids. So you
That's
don't
right.
have to just hand that over to somebody else. As tempting as it might be to think that I'm never going to have to talk to my ex again, my clients, I teach them how to talk to their ex again so
Yeah.
that it's not filled with conflict and they can still be good co-parents and all this other stuff. Um,
I
but you
will
know,
say, some of the things that Liesel teaches in terms of communication are so powerful in really changing the whole communication dynamic between people. And it may feel like you are stuck in this perpetual cycle, but when you start to learn those skills, it can really change everything.
oh, it can totally revolutionize. It might not, at the very least, you will again become very empowered for your side of the communication
Right.
because you can't control what the other person's going to do. But I always say that you change one part of the equation changes the outcome, right? Just what change you changing your part of how you communicate and set boundaries will change the outcome, whether it's just on your side and maybe you feel more empowered and things are going better for you, or maybe it does change that whole dynamic with your ex, and it can become something that you both are able to do in a very powerful way, in a very peaceful way, in a way that puts the kids first so that you're not fighting about that. Because my goal always is I tell people, okay, so you're transitioning from being married partners to being co parents. Right? And there's just because you couldn't be good married partners doesn't mean you can't be great co parents.
That's right.
Right? That's always a hope that I have for people who work with me is that that's always a possibility. Um, but it all comes down to you have to kind of understand that you have more power than you think you do.
That's right.
We all have more power than we think we do. So you got to understand that your lawyer is an expert in all things legalese, right? That's their area of expertise. They are not financial experts. They are not emotional experts. I know I've talked to so many attorneys that say, you know what? I'm so glad that my client is working with you because I don't want to deal with all the emotional garbage. I don't, I mean, I'm sure if they want to sit on the phone and talk to me for an hour at $400 an hour, I'll do it, but I don't know how effective it's going to be for them. And, I feel like I'm just taking their money because it's not my area. But what I can do is I can help you manage that emotional piece. Kind of goes back to number one, so that you're not making big decisions out of big emotions that have kind of hijacked you.
Right.
That's one of the things that a divorce coach is really, that's one way they can save you money, is because we don't charge anywhere near what an attorney charges. And I am anyway. I was a therapist in a former lifetime. I'm a certified life coach and I'm a certified divorce coach. And I know how to help you handle those emotions to get them back under control. We'll process them, in a way that is helpful to you and not just kind of venting to somebody who doesn't really, they're not trained to help you with that and they don't really want to. They want to do their legal stuff, right? That's
Right.
what they spend all their time doing, and that's what they're there to help you with. So again, they're not there in the other capacities that you really need to have when you are going through a divorce. So, they're not going to know. Again, like I said, Leah, this goes to your expertise, all the intricacies of the financial picture. They're not trained in that. They might know some basic things, but if you have if it's a complicated situation, or even if you just want to get a good idea of what your financial picture might look like and run some scenarios, Leah's your person here is going to do that, not necessarily your lawyer. Also, even things such as parenting plans. I help my clients come up with, what do you think a parenting plan would look like that would be really good for your family, your particular situation, your particular kids. And a lawyer might not have, they might not sit down with you and be able to do that. And if they do, it's going to be at a much higher price point too. I'm going to keep hammering that point home, because working with a divorce coach can actually save you a lot of money.
Absolutely. I think, it's important to recognize that good, solid legal advice is so powerful in the divorce process. So many people are going online and getting bad information, quite frankly, in different, whether it's Facebook groups or on Instagram or TikTok or wherever they're getting their
Yeah.
information. There is no substitute for good, solid legal advice. But recognizing the fact that your attorney is not going to be everybody for you, I think is such an important point that you're
Yeah.
making.
So you really need to build a team, right? This is how you avoid that pitfall, is build a team. So yes, you need your attorney. And like, even when I'm doing mediations, I always tell my clients, have an attorney at least like on standby, or as a consultant, that when legal questions come up, you have somebody who will answer your questions, because I'm not an attorney. We don't have any
Right.
attorneys in our
Right.
practice here. So you will need an attorney in some capacity, some more than others, depending on what you're doing. You're going here, but you need an attorney. You might need a mediator. Um, you might need a CDFA, like you are, Leah. Certified divorce financial analyst or advisor, right? Analyst. Um,
Analyst.
you might need to talk to a realtor. You might need to have an appraiser. Get an appraisal on your house, so you know what numbers you're dealing with. You might need a therapist if you are having some ongoing emotional issues, such as if it's really clinical depression or clinical anxiety. Some of these bigger things that you might need to get some additional help to manage that. Get a divorce coach. Divorce coach will help you with things that, if it's not to a clinical level, to get a grip on your emotions and to help you think things through, and maybe practice some conversations that you have coming up, maybe even write the script with you, and just be a an objective person that you can bounce ideas off of, and just really kind of work through these things, so that you're not having to, again, have those things sabotage when you do go to talk with your lawyer and get their advice. Because there's all, like, again, I said, the lawyer's not going to be able to handle everything. So get a
Yeah.
team. Get a team together.
So we have our first two are not letting your emotions control the process, right?
Mhm.
And not thinking that your attorney is going to handle everything. What else? What are some other
Okay.
mistakes that people make?
Underestimating financial implications. And again, here's where you could be really, really helpful to people here. But it's very common for people to just be thinking, well, who's going to get what? Like, how are we going to divide all this stuff and then go on our merry way? And you might really be making some long-term mistakes, as far as things like retirements go, or what's going to happen with the house, and are there tax implications with that, or what about making a budget? Uh, so
Yeah,
like,
what I see the biggest thing is as it relates to the finances, and obviously I could go on for hours about
yeah,
financial mistakes that people make, but I think the biggest one is you're in the discomfort of transition when you're going through
right,
divorce, right? Everything is changing. You talked about that before. And so a lot of times our financial decisions are about finding comfort today or getting out of the discomfort today, right? And so
yeah,
really very short-sighted oftentimes is unfortunately a very common mistake that people make, and not necessarily having those kind of longer term planning thoughts around, just like you were talking about, Lisa, like what are the tax implications of this situation long term? What is this going to mean for my retirement? Things like that.
yeah. And one of the like a real common example is, let's say somebody, usually it's the mom says, I'm keeping the house at all costs. Like, I want to stay in the house. I want, the kids to stay in their school. I want, we grew up here. I've got so many memories here. I am keeping the house. And what you might not understand is, okay, so that means you're probably going to have to buy out your your ex, right? Unless he gives you the house as some kind of a swap deal, like you keep the house, I keep my retirement, don't touch it. That I've seen that happen. But you might have to run some numbers and see if it is even feasible for you to keep the house. Because if you have to refinance at today's interest rates, and let's say you've been in the house and you've been in there for a while and you have a great, we were talking about this morning, a 3% interest rate. And if you have to refinance at today's interest rates, that's going to be a doozy of a number that you're going to have to look at and say, okay, so now my mortgage is not what I thought it was going to be. It's going to be a lot higher. And then you have to factor in, okay, there's going to be upkeep, there's, the taxes on it. Another thing that people don't realize is, and I'm hoping I'll get this right. So like a tax implication comes in here. If you were to sell the house as a couple, I believe it's $250,000 each, is the, like, for gains.
Right. So there is a capital gains exclusion of $250,000 per person
Yeah.
if we are talking about selling the primary residence and you lived in it for at least 2 of the last 5 years. And so, right, if you're selling as a married couple, you're selling the primary marital residence, there is a $500,000 capital gains exclusion. And this is a big deal for people who negotiate keeping the house and then want to sell it 2 years later. Well, you
Yeah.
lost a $250,000 capital gains exclusion. Obviously, that has a bigger impact in certain areas of the country where we've seen bigger gains in real estate.
Yeah.
But it can be a significant, cost that you might not be considering for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was one thing that came to mind. And other things might be like, do you have to go back to work? Are you gonna, to keep your lifestyle, you're not having two incomes anymore. Or you might have to really sit down and do a budget. I mean, a budget is really important at this point because you have to know what's coming in and what's going out. And you might
And I
have
think
to,
that's such an important point, Liesel, because a lot of times people hear the word budget and they kind of look at it as a bad word.
yeah,
I find a lot of comfort in budgets because it's exactly what you were talking about. It's knowing where the money's coming from and where it's going. It's just having a plan for where your money's coming and going. It's not necessarily like being on a diet, right? Where it's
right?
like
Doesn't have to be a
restrictive.
punishment.
Yeah. But knowing what your expenses are going to be post divorce is really important in order to plan your cash flow and make sure that you're going to have the income to support yourself.
Yeah. And even as far as things as like saying, okay, that, or I really do want to stay in the house. I can make it work, but maybe the kids can't all be on traveling sports teams
Right.
because that's just way too much. Or instead of eating takeout 5 nights a week just because it's convenient, or we're only going to do it once a week, and we're going to have to learn some how to cook here, but we can make that into a family experiment, and we can have some fun with it. So it's again, it's I think all of this is just about empowerment, right? Knowledge
Right.
is power, and just knowing what you're dealing with and what you can do with that, even if you have to rearrange things, your life is probably going to look at least a little bit different as you go through this. And on the other side, different doesn't mean worse, though. It can just mean moving some things around, and you might be pleasantly surprised to find that you like it even better, even if you have to cut some things out, or even have to make some changes here. It can still be for the better.
I
Um,
remember talking with a client who had retained her home in her divorce. And she'd been there probably, I think it was maybe about 5 years post divorce. And then she says, Leah, I'm finally ready to sell. And she sold it and she bought a much smaller condo. So, from a financial standpoint, it was a really good move for her. But it was so much more than that. It was owning her own space. It was like letting go of the home that they had together. It was just, I remembered this huge shift in her. And like I said, it was several years after the divorce where it was like, okay, now I'm really going to own my space. I'm going to enjoy the
yeah,
space. I'm going to make it what I want it to be. I selected it myself. All of that goes into that. I know a
yeah,
lot of times people are feeling very worn out by the divorce process, and it can be hard to get excited about like something like that. But with that being said, when you can, I think it's amazing.
well, yeah, so moving is again one of the top three life stressors.
Yeah.
So I get it. I had to move from like a 2,500 square foot house. I'm in an apartment now that's under 1,000 square feet. And I will tell you, I love it. I've been there for 9 years. And it was just such a feeling of this is totally my space.
Right.
I get to decorate this however I want it. I can buy all new. I remember I bought all new linens. I bought, all new towels, all new bed sheets. I even bought all new pots and pans because I'm like, I cooked for this guy out of these things. And I had a friend, actually, he was a mutual friend who worked for a Calphalon, and he let me use his employee discount to buy a whole new set of pot and pans. And my mom, who's very practical, she's like, "What are you doing? Those don't work. Do you want them? I don't want these anymore." But a lot of it was psychological, like you said. It's just like this is my own space. I'm starting my life over. Um, and I remember like when we had to meet to, for whatever reason, when we sold our house, the mortgage company, the title company, made the check out just to me, which was awesome. But I did have to give half to him, and I remember he came down to where I was living, but I met him in the very nice communal space that we had there. I did not want him in my apartment for even one footstep in because just psychological again. It's like this is
Yeah.
mine, it's untainted. I will meet him somewhere else and we'll take care of business.
Good for
But
you.
really, it can have, it does. You don't have to have a huge house to be happy, right?
So we're running up on time a little bit, and I want to get
Okay.
to the other two mistakes that people make. So what are those other two
All right.
mistakes that people make?
We will speed this up a little bit. Number four is neglecting emotional recovery. Okay, so it's very common. A lot of times people will think, oh, I'll take care of myself once it's over, or once I'm done, I'll be fine, right? And it's usually not like that unless you can get a grip and work through and honor your emotions as you go through a divorce. You're going to find out that they're causing you problems on the other side, especially if you're trying to start a new relationship with somebody. Um, if you don't take the time to really look at what happened. A marriage takes two, right? A divorce takes two. Even if, like in my case, like my spouse cheated on me, I still had to look at, well, what was going on that he felt like he needed to do that. It took me a long time to get there. But there's, you got to have some ownership in part of this because that's what you can change then, right? So unless you get a grip on that, you're going to take all the problems that you had in your marriage and it's going to go into your new relationships. So you really want to be able to take care of yourself and to nurture yourself. And here's the other thing: you got to put it's a cliche, but you have to put your own oxygen mask on first before you can help anybody else. And a lot of times people are so into, I'm just trying to keep my head above water. I'm just trying to make sure the kids are fed and off to school on time. I don't have time to take care of me. What are you talking about? I'll do it later. You really need to make this a priority because a divorce will suck the living life out of you if you don't take care of yourself. And you really, just things like maybe take a yoga class, do some meditation, write in a journal. That's a great way to kind of manage your emotions here. Um, what else did I have here? Uh, if you need therapy, get a therapist. If you need a divorce coach, get a divorce coach. Get some support. If you need to find a support group, we have one here too. But find some place to get some support so you don't have to go through this by yourself. Like you're not alone. You don't have to do this alone. Thousands and thousands of women have gotten divorced. We've all survived. Some better than other, but I would like to see you thrive, right? And it's totally possible to do that. Um, Let me go ahead and just do the last one.
Sure.
Okay, last one is trying to win in the divorce. Okay, nobody wins in a divorce except for the lawyers. Okay, and honestly, a lot of times people think that that they're going to get justice. Like, oh, my spouse cheated. He's going to be punished in the court system, and I'm going to come out. People are going to be on my side, and I'm going to be rewarded for this. And no, no, you're not. The the courts are about dividing your assets and your debts and figuring out what's going to happen with the kids. They are not going to punish anybody for having an affair. Um, they're not going to punish your spouse for if he was treating you, not in the best manner, unless he was trying to kill you or something like that. Then that's a different case. That's a different court. But you're not going to get justice per se through the court system or in a divorce. And if you are bent on, I'm going to win, that means that you're thinking he has to lose, right? And if that's your mindset, the only people who are going to lose are going to be your kids. All right. So conflict is what makes divorce expensive, and conflict between parents is what is damaging to the kids. It's not divorce per se. They will adjust if they have to have, go to two different households for their new family dynamics. They will adjust to that. But if the parents are fighting and there's lots of conflict there, that's what hurts the kids. Because you don't ever want to make your kids feel like they have to choose between parents. That's not fair, and that's what is damaging. So if you can get that if you can just get that one idea into your head as you go through divorces, let's have a child-centered divorce so our kids don't have a divorce-centered childhood, right? Start thinking about, how do I want my kids to think about how this divorce went? That can be a real eye opener for parents to think, oh, I wasn't thinking about that at all. Or how do you want this to be? Especially if you're going to be co parents, how do you want your relationship to be with your ex spouse at the end of this? And start your communications with them with that in mind so that it can go as smoothly as possible. It can be as amicable as possible so that at the other end of this, you two can talk okay with each other. You can, talk about what the kids' needs are. It doesn't mean you have to be buddy buddy with them, but you can have a relationship where the kids don't have to worry about what's going to happen when we get married and mom and dad can't be in the same room because they're fighting. Or they can't be at the same birthday party for me because they're going to fight. You don't want to do that to your kids. So don't have the mind. You have to have a mindset of, let's get through this the best that each of us can. Remember, I have some empathy. You at one point loved this person enough to get married, right? So they're not all terrible. Find something about them that you can remember that, I did like this about this person. And if you can bring that to your negotiations, or what you want your lawyer to express on your behalf, if you have to, be kind. As much as you can, be kind, and think about what would be a fair split, fair and equitable. Don't be out for punishment. You work through that with a coach or in therapy. Okay, don't bring that into your divorce process. You're just going to make it more expensive, and it's just going to hurt.
Well,
And
I think that's such an important point because you and I, and kind of the work that we do, we talk about solutions, right?
yeah,
And so basically looking at this as a puzzle or a problem that we need to solve, and what are some solutions that we can use to solve it. But ultimately, I think you're absolutely right. There's no winner and there's no loser.
yeah,
There's a big transition that has happened. We can make it either more comfortable for the families that we work with, or, if you have this sort of win-lose mentality, there are some obvious things that Liesel has talked about that are very common that come up in these divorce cases that really increase conflict.
yeah, yeah. So sometimes just learning how not to throw fuel on the fire
Right.
is a huge step.
Right.
Right? If you can just manage that, just in your tone, in the words you use, and just how you're gonna have a conversation, you can change. You have a lot of power here, and that we always come back to that. We want this to be empowering for our clients who have to go through this. And that is a big, huge thing that you do have absolute control over, is how are you going to talk to your person. Um, and, I have a whole thing on, if it's a really difficult, challenging ex that you have, there's some strategies that we can definitely teach you that will help calm things down and not add fuel to the fire at the very least, but also give you your life back so that you're not spending a lot of time engaging in some really destructive patterns.
And Liesel has a really cool workshop coming up shortly. Liesel, tell us about the workshop and what people can learn from that.
We have this workshop coming up. I'm calling it Divorce Coaching, the Unfair Advantage.
I love
Because
it.
it is. Anybody who has a divorce coach has a very unfair advantage over the spouse who does not. And this is on May 20th, and it's going to be at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to have a little workbook that you can can use as well. But we're really working, I've identified 5 things. I'm calling the 5 C's. They all start with C. And how if you can tap into these different aspects of this with your divorce coach, you're going to be so much better off. You're going to be so much further ahead. You're going to be making some really good decisions for yourself, and you're going to feel a lot better than the person who does not have the advantage of having a divorce coach. So that's coming up later this month. I'm so excited.
Well, Liesel, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. I think this is a really important topic because there are, unfortunately, a lot of common mistakes that are made that have negative impacts on families, that have financial costs associated with them, but even just the energy drain of some of these mistakes can really have a huge impact. So thank you for being with us, and for our audience, we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for joining me on Intentional Divorce Insights. It's a privilege to share this time with you. I hope each episode offers valuable guidance to navigate your journey. If you find our content helpful, please leave a review to help others discover the benefits of intentional decision-making in divorce. Until next time, take care and continue to embrace your path with intention.